Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honour to rise and speak in support of this motion with some conversation that I would like to have just around some of the potential options that could be discussed when the review occurs around adoption. Obviously, I was a child protection worker before I was elected, and I actually worked as a kinship support worker for a while, doing home assessments and placing children with kinship families. And so I have worked through permanency and looking at PGAs, permanent guardianship agreements, and permanent guardianship orders to adoption. So I've worked my way through the process with families in different capacities, as well as I have some personal experience with my extended family around international adoptions and as well as adoptions within Alberta. In saying that, I do have some cautions around online profiling. And it's not that I'm against it. I believe that adoptive families should have as much opportunity to be able to connect with biological families and to be able to have those conversations. But there is a process that has to come along with that. So I hear that the official opposition talking about looking at, why does Children's Services need to be involved? And is there a way that we can look at modernizing the legislation so that doesn't happen? And I mean, there is capacity for direct placements where there is limited involvement with Children's Services. But part of the reason why Children's Services is involved on more occasions than not is the fact that it is ultimately the government's responsibility to ensure that children are safe, that we are doing all of the assessments that are required to ensure that the home is safe, that the family that they are being placed with is appropriate, and that all of those needs are being met. And so when we look at adoption websites and seeing biological families reaching out to adoptive families, my only caution would be is that there's a potential for vulnerable parents who may not have the cognitive capacity to understand what the adoption process looks like, or really understanding what adoption means in the context of permanency and the fact that this isn't an option to place a child for short term and then want to have them back at some point. And so it sets up the biological family as well as potentially the adoptive family for having an extremely hard and painful experience when either the biological family starts going through the process of adoption and then changes their mind, or the child is placed with the adoptive family permanently and their forever home is set up and they are experiencing all of these positive things, and then all of a sudden the biological family comes back and says, well, I have changed my mind. And so it's extremely important that Children's Services helps with that process so that they can provide the counseling that's required for the biological parents, so that we can ensure that the biological parents understand that when a child is going to be adopted, it is a forever home, and that they can't, come back in a year or 6 months and say, well, I changed my mind, I would like my baby back, or my young adult, or, any child, really. I mean, it's not just babies that get adopted. There's lots of different ages. And the other piece of that as well is that there is potential for supports through Children's Services. So if we're talking about the supports for permanency program, which is a financial plus emotional support for adoptive families or families with PGAs, if a child goes through the Children's Services system and has a permanent guardianship order and then becomes adopted, the government still has a responsibility to support that adoptive family. By choice, it's voluntary. I mean, it's not a requirement that we would go in and see that family, but there is that capacity to provide that additional support for counseling, for special equipment if required, if the child has a special need, looking at, talking about sibling counseling. There's a variety of different things that can be supported, not only for the child, but for the adoptive family. And so these are important things that definitely, I think, as we move forward and we review the legislation and we look at the motion that is before us today, that those are things to consider. How do we do those so that we're ensuring that we're protecting both the biological family as well as the adoptive family and the little person in between, while still promoting a very important long-term, forever home for children. Because again, I have personal experience. I know how important this is. I also know the struggles that come with it through the process. And so I just want to make sure that when we are doing it, we're doing it in a way that we're supporting more adoptive families and allowing this opportunity to occur, but making sure that everybody is also safe. So I do support the motion. I just have some cautionary statements. Thank you.